think pop doesn't, just because it's popular, it doesn't have to be the boring cookie cutter music. I think pop just means pop music that's popular. Welcome back to my channel. I make videos about music, songwriting, and the creative process. It's been a hot minute since I've posted. I've had quite a few life changes. I moved again to a new apartment. It's pretty cute. It's like on top of like a retail shop in a busy downtown area, so it's definitely different from where I was before, which was kind of like the middle of nowhere, closer to Quebec. I know that you probably subscribe to my channel because you want to hear me talk more about men playing guitars, but today I'm going to flip the script a little and I'm going to be talking about a young woman who made experimental, avant-garde, very radical, I think, music, and that is Björk. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but I'm doing my best. She's an Icelandic singer, songwriter, record producer, and even DJ, and her career has spanned over 4 decades, which is insane. And she has a really eclectic music style. It draws on pop, electronic, experimental, avant-garde, alternative, classical, and even like acid and house music. So I guess if I had to choose just one genre, it would be like experimental art pop. But it kind of feels wrong to put a label onto her music, doesn't it? Björk. She is basically a musical renegade. She's also a self-described music nerd, which I can relate to heavily, and she says that her musical identity was heavily influenced by Kate Bush and the acid music subgenre, which I can totally see that. And Björk actually performed in a variety of bands, such as the Sugar Cubes, as well as in a punk rock band that she formed called Spit and Snot, a jazz fusion group called Exodus, and a post-punk band, Tapi Tikaras. So yeah, she's wild. The first song that I remember hearing from Björk was actually her cover of It's Oh So Quiet, and I'm embarrassed to admit, but it's also amusing that I thought that that was her original song for longer than I'm comfortable admitting to. But I was a toddler when her version of it was released, so I guess you can cut me some slack. But I remember dancing around to It's So Quiet in my family's living room, just like mesmerized by the sort of like alternating softness and at times harshness or like squawking of her vocal stylings. And I'm pretty sure I was either wearing a tutu or like imagining that I was, because that song is totally a tutu song. But there's just something about her music that is both uplifting and disconcerting, but it works. And yeah, Debut was her first, I think, and only studio record, and it was released in July of 1993. The record shook the status quo of contemporary music and the musical climate at the time, which kind of distanced pop away from being made by men with guitars, which was sort of popularized by the grunge and Britpop sort of styles that were really, really popular in the 90s. And I think what makes Björk sound a bit unsettling is it's just sort of this like concoction, this like brew of different genres. You get that like jazz fusion sound, there's like acid, funk, opera, and then you've got her voice, which is just like ethereal, otherworldly, and it's like strong and soft, and it's everything in between. And I think when you're not used to something and something is sort of like unfamiliar, it can be disconcerting, and I think that's why we feel a little bit unsettled by her and her music, not in a bad way, but I think it's just like she's breaking boundaries and like crossing boundaries in music that you don't hear often enough to be familiar with. So it's like at times there's like a cognitive dissonance, and you get like these upbeat dance rhythms combined with her very like unique vocal stylings. And sometimes when I listen to the album debut, it reminds me of the alien opera scene in The Fifth Element. Stay with me here. But it's just like the music is so beautiful and it's captivating, but at the same time, it's very intimidating. And that's how I feel about Björk's music and about her in general, because like just how is she so creative? Like save some for the rest of us. We could use that creative boldness and just boldness in life. I wish I was that bold. And to give you a bit of context to me, as a kid, I really like related to Björk and resonated with her because I was a weird kid. I was like the artsy kid. I didn't have too many friends. I was sort of bullied, very introverted, but also like creative and expressive. And I think that's like an interesting combination to have, which I think Björk shares that sort of characteristic. Like I could relate to that. That just gives you a bit of insight into how I connect to her music. She did this little interview with Wired in 2013 on music and biophilia. Let's take a listen to a little clip of that part of the interview.
Sort of started. But then I also went to music school from the age of 5 to 15. So I was being introduced to, the classical canon, Beethoven and Bach, and kind of like finding some of it interesting, but a lot of it kind of not really matching my own strong experience.
You were kind of rebelling already at that age against that type of learning, against that kind of sort of dictatorial system of learning?
Yeah, I think it had become a little bit too academic and too removed from music with a big M, and also being a girl in the 70s in Iceland. I mean, this was like for guys in Germany in the 1700s, so it was I wanted musicology for girls, Icelandic girls, so...
I love that. So Björk is talking about how when she went to music school and learning sort of like the classical music, that it was kind of boring, not interesting to her, and she mentions how the music that you learn in school and that sort of school environment is like the classical music that was basically for men, done by men in the 1700s. And I think that was sort of like this insightful comment, because that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is just how she made music for herself in a way. She didn't necessarily make it for others, and I think that that's part of why her music is so special, is because she was making music for girls in the 90s, not following the sort of like traditional standards of what music should be and what it should sound like. You get this very creative boldness from her, and this is something that I will mention a few times. I think that what Björk did for the musical climate for contemporary music, we really needed Björk. So Björk's music was necessary. I think Björk's music is still really necessary. I don't think, although it had a huge impact on shaking up the status quo of the musical climate, I don't think that it affected music enough, in the sense that the pop music and the dance music that's made today is not really that creative. It's not that experimental. There are musicians out there and songwriters that are being very creative, very unique, and really experimenting with different sounds. And there's stuff like art pop, and there's stuff like some stuff in like the indie pop, or like there's experimental music. But I'm talking specifically about pop. I think pop doesn't, just because it's popular, it doesn't have to be the boring cookie cutter music. I think pop just means pop music that's popular. pop music could be whatever we want it to be. It could be creative, it could be radical, it could be experimental if we really want it, just like Björk has done and continues to do. We need Björk. We still need Björk. Interestingly, Björk felt that house music, so this was the early 1990s, house music was the only modern pop music where anything creative was happening. And this is really interesting and intriguing because I think nowadays when I think like dance and pop, like the most common and popular music out there in those genres, it's not very creative. It's very like cookie cutter. It's just not very bold in terms of its creativity, and it utilizes like often very similar or even exact same chord progressions, and there's not much of a mix of genres, maybe just a little bit here and there, but it's still often very guitar driven. So Björk said in a 1993 interview for ID magazine that she felt that guitar driven music is outdated because this sort of like guitar, bass, and drums band setup or dynamic, it tends to lapse into sort of predictable traditional forms, and you can really see that in a lot of the pop music today. So basically, the point I'm trying to make here is that pop music needed Björk. And coming from the Sugar Cubes, Icelandic Sugar Cubes, Björk transitions from a guitar-driven indie rock sound to pure, unadulterated dance music. And the shift allowed her to fully utilize her very unique vocal talents. And of her move to London and her album debut, Björk said in ID magazine 1993, "I'd had these songs in me since I was a little kid, and I knew that I might submerge this creative impulse forever. But I looked around me and thought about all the things that give me the greatest joy in life. It might be incredibly good wine that's just perfect, or the right music where you can tell that the artist has gone all the way, done anything to create a perfect song. I had to have a go at least once before I die, and see if I could do the same thing." So Björk says that she has this creative impulse, and essentially she was following her musical muse, and we heard the same thing with Paul McCartney, and I'm sure we'll hear it with other songwriters as well. But this muse, it's like, where is that coming from, you know? Is it just like something that creative people are born with, or is it something that's sort of cultivated? And I think it's a mix of both. There's always like the nurture versus nature argument. And I think that creative people, if they nurture their creativity, they can continue to sort of receive that muse, because it kind of does feel like something that you're receiving rather than something you're doing yourself. But it does involve certain actions, and I'm going to talk more about how to inspire that muse in yourself and sort of how to follow it. But back to Björk. So she had this singular vision for a debut, but she had the guidance of an experienced producer, Nelly Hooper, and then the result is this intoxicating blend of house rhythms and jazz, and then combine that with Björk's voice, and it's just like, oh, it's a brilliant record. I listened to it like twice just in a day. I was just really into it. A little bit more from this interview with ID magazine, 1993. Björk described her childhood a little bit, and I really want to point this out because I think it's an interesting insight. So she describes her childhood as having had this feeling that she'd been dropped from somewhere else. And this is her quote. "That was how I was treated at school in Iceland, where the kids used to call me China Girl, and everybody thought I was unusual because I was Chinese. It gave me room to do my own thing. In school, I was mostly on my own, playing happily in my private world, making things, composing little songs. If I can get the space I need to do my own thing by being called an alien, an elf, a China Girl, or whatever. then that's great. I think I've only realized in the past few years what a comfortable situation that is. I tried to look up info on Björk. Is she Chinese? I could only find that she's Icelandic. But because Björk's eyes do have the epicanthic folds, and she has a sort of like wider nose bridge than average, she has the appearance of being Asian. Now, not everyone who has those folds are Asian. This trait does appear in non-Asian populations as well. But because it gave her this appearance, she was bullied in school and sort of othered for her appearance. And I wonder how her experience of being othered like this in school as a young girl growing up contributed to her motivation to be creative. And she describes the upside to this experience of being othered as something she realized gave her the space to create. And so I think this is very insightful, because creativity is often defined as the ability to come up with new ideas. Björk certainly came up with new ideas with her musical styles. And children that are creative are often picked on, and this could be due to jealousy of the attention that the creative child is receiving. And it's possible that her being a creative child actually made her more likely to be othered or to be treated as different by her peers or even bullied. And being othered may have also caused Björk to further retreat into her own world, as she mentions, into her own creativity, composing music or playing little things on her own. And by being more withdrawn seeming, at least in this sort of school age scenario, it gave her that space to work on her creative skills. And in a way, this could create sort of like a vicious cycle. The more she withdraws into her own world and, she's working on her own creative little projects as a child, I think the more other kids pick up on the fact that she might be different, and there might be more bullying and therefore more othering, and then increasing that space for creativity. Now, I'm not saying that bullying is good or that it was a positive thing. I'm sure it has had negative impacts for her, which we don't necessarily know about, and I'm not a psychologist by any means. I've studied a bit of psychology in university, but it is not my main focus. It's just something I'm interested in. These are just sort of my observations that I'm noticing. Yeah, while bullying is not good, I think that Björk kind of saw the silver lining to a situation which I'm sure had negative impacts on her, in that it gave her space away from others to create. She says, "I want this album to be pop music that everybody can listen to. I think not sticking to any particular musical style makes the album real. Life isn't always the same. You don't live in the same style from day to day. Unexpected things happen that are beyond our control. And that's this record. One song is about the mood you're in walking to the corner shop. Another is about being drunk and out of it on drugs in a club. And the next one's about feeling romantic and making love." So Björk here is talking about her album debut, and this is again from the interview in 1993, ID magazine. And this is sort of Björk's philosophy on the album and on pop music. She wanted it to be something that was relevant to today's life, but not just relevant to contemporary life, but also to the shifting nature of life in general. And this is a very insightful statement that she's making. And this is pop philosophy according to Björk, where meaningful music and disposable pop aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So we often think of pop and we think of this sort of disposable music that you can just discard, like something that is very cookie cutter. It just sounds like everything else that you've heard. maybe it has meaning, but it's just sort of like fast food of music. But Björk goes on to say, pop is music for a particular moment. So you should be able to throw it away the next day, but it has to be real for that one moment, so that as you're doing the dishes and you hear it on the radio, you can relate to it. You can go deep into it and know that it matters and makes a difference for you. It doesn't have to be some existential arty piece. It can just be a song that everybody can sing along to. But it has to touch you deeply for that moment. And although this statement was made in 1983, I think this sentiment or this sort of philosophy on pop music is 100% still relevant today. When I think of meaningful music or even movies and art that touches me, it's not necessarily that it has to be making this big existential statement. It could be just focusing on the meaning of a moment. It could be the smallest fleeting moment. It could be something so small but significant still for the moment. And I think that's what Björk was trying to convey through her album. And I think that is really unique and insightful. And a final quote from her is, "Pop music has betrayed us. Everybody in the world needs pop music, but nobody has had the courage to make pop that's relevant to the modern world." And I think that's exactly what Björk had done, and continues to do, is she's making pop music for today. It's relevant, and it's relevant to the little moments in life. And I think that combined with her boldness, how she uses creativity sort of like adventurously, and with this creative curiosity for what she can make and what she could combine, sounds she can mix together, and then you get the intoxicating brew that is Björk's music. So in conclusion, I feel like Björk, we need her music, we need her philosophy on pop, and I think what we can take away from this as songwriters and even just as fans of music is to know the importance of the moment, and to really relish the moment, and not always be trying to make a big statement. Sometimes the statement is just the moment, and that could be quite beautiful, and that could be quite sensual. It could be quite creative and curious. And I think that by distancing herself away from the guitar-driven sort of popular music, Björk was able to create her own style, and she's really seen as a true renegade in music. And I think if we could just even have just the tiniest fraction of her creative boldness, then we could use that for our own work, for our own careers, for our own music, art, whatever it is that we're doing. Just have the courage to move beyond what is traditional and what is around us all the time and what we see as the status quo. It's okay to be different, and it's okay to be weird, and it's okay to really push boundaries. And I want to take from that and just apply it to my own music and to my own life. And just thinking about, as a kid, how much I related to Björk and how I felt really othered, and I still do at times. I would like to sort of take back the part of me that society tries to take away, in the sense that for a long time I really did try to be like an IKEA catalog version of myself. I would do things exactly how others might want me to. I always had this sort of rebellious streak, but I didn't give into it because I was scared of what people might think. And I think last year when I was working on my own music, I I think the only thing that allowed me to go forward and actually make the music, write the music, and record it was this rebellious streak, this sort of creative curiosity I had of almost like Björk describes as the musical muse, this like creative urge. I gave into it fully and boldly, and I'm really glad that I did. Thank you so much for watching my channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm going to be making more videos about music, the creative process, and insights into songwriting specifically. If you did enjoy this video, please hit the like, subscribe, and even share it if you like so that others can find my video as well. And leave a comment on your thoughts on Björk, on her songwriting style, or just anything that you feel you can relate to. And if you have any questions or suggestions for other songwriters you might want me to cover, let me know in the comment section below. I'm Deanna Faye, Canadian singer-songwriter, and see you guys next time. Take care.